The desert wind tastes of salt and smoke. It drags across the plain and hurls itself against walls that shimmer like molten gold. Before you rises a city that should not exist, an ocean of brick and fire, vast enough to swallow the horizon. Babylon, the city of light. Its gates are carved with lions, its streets paved with the dust of conquered kings. Towers rise like spears through the haze, their tips piercing the sun. From every balcony hang banners dyed in blood and saffron. From every temple roof, incense drifts upward in perfect spirals, 1,000 prayers clawing at the sky. You hear music, flutes, drums, the rhythmic clap of hands. It rolls through the alleys like a living pulse. You can smell myrrh and wine, sweet rot and perfume, all tangled in the same breath. The river glows red beneath the last light of evening, carrying the city's reflection like a wound. Traders shout in foreign tongues, slaves bend under baskets of figs and gold, and in the gardens, women laugh behind veils that hide their tears. The air itself feels alive, trembling with power, thick with belief that the gods walk among men. But stay still for a moment. Beneath the hymns and laughter, there is another sound, the low, uneven rhythm of something trapped below. It beats against the ground like a muffled heart. You feel it under your feet when the drums pause. You sense it in the hush between prayers. It is not music. It is pleading. Follow it. Down narrow steps, past walls slick with oil, into the mouth of the city where the light cannot follow. The air grows heavy. The scent of incense turns to smoke, and the sound becomes clearer now, breath, choked and shallow. A torch flickers against carvings of gods whose eyes seem to move when the flame bends. You see shapes kneeling in the half-light, their bodies trembling as if the earth itself were devouring them. Somewhere above, a priest's voice calls for purity, for sacrifice, for devotion. The crowd answers with cheers that drown the cries below. The marble beneath your hand is warm, almost wet. The silence between chants feels alive, thick with waiting. You realize the city is built not on sand, but on flesh and fear. Every hymn above feeds on what happens here, in the dark, where no one speaks. The towers still glitter, proud and holy. The people still dance in the streets. The gods are watching. And yet, you cannot shake the question that rises like heat from the stones beneath you. Can a civilization that reached for heaven do so while crawling through hell? The question lingers in the air like smoke. Can a civilization that reached for heaven do so while crawling through hell? Above the darkness, Babylon glows. You rise from the shadows into a city that dazzles the eyes and confuses the soul. The streets stretch wide as rivers, paved in sun-fired brick that gleams like copper under the midday blaze. Gardens hang from terraces high above you, 1,000 vines dripping with flowers and fruit that never touch the dust. The sound of hammers and lyres mingles in the air. Craftsmen carve miracles while musicians weave hymns to the gods. Every corner smells of oil, incense, and ambition. You watch scholars trace constellations in wet clay, their fingers steady as priests. They name the planets, map the heavens, and speak of laws written not just for kings, but for eternity. Beneath their hands, stone tablets fill with rules of justice and commerce, edicts meant to order the chaos of men. From these walls will come the first codes, the first records, the first attempts to cage power in words. Here, reason is born beside reverence. Logic and worship, calculation and faith, they live together as if they were one. The minds that measured the stars also built towers for their gods, each tier closer to the divine. You see them rise from the heart of the city, perfect steps leading upward to eternity. At their base stand priests in robes of deep crimson, faces painted with ash. They speak of mercy and purity, of the holiness of the human form. The people kneel, trembling in devotion. You almost believe them. Almost. But even as the city sings of enlightenment, a whisper crawls beneath the music, a rumor that the light hides more than it reveals. The same minds that studied the movement of Venus recorded other mysteries too. How desire could be harnessed, sanctified, and sold. How the body could become both prayer and currency. They wrote of it in symbols only the priests could read. They called it sacred. The merchants called it profitable. The empire of gods and men was not held together by wisdom alone. It was fed by need, by hunger dressed in ritual. Its beauty stands on the edge of something unspeakable, waiting to be named. What if I told you that Babylon's greatest temple wasn't a place of worship, but of sacrifice in disguise? You return to the city's heart, where the ziggurat of Ishtar looms like a mountain of fire against the sky. Crowds pour toward it, drawn by promises of blessing. The air trembles with bells, chants, and the flutter of doves released into the sun. Yet, behind the sanctuaries, the real offering begins. Here, faith has become a market. The temple courts bustle with the noise of bargaining, the clink of silver, the low murmur of deals struck in shadows. Every vow has a price, every sin a tariff. Priests record transactions with the precision of accountants. They claim the goddess demands devotion. The ledgers show devotion converted to profit. In these halls, women are offerings and commodities, their names replaced with numbers etched in clay. Pilgrims travel from distant lands to seek absolution through touch, to purchase salvation with desire. The ritual is said to honor the goddess of love, but the line between worship and exploitation is drawn in dust and blood. The priests bless each exchange as sacred duty. They weigh coins before the altar and call it devotion. The faithful bow their heads, mistaking greed for holiness. And when the day's rites end, the temple coffers overflow. In Babylon, sin isn't punished, it's priced. If you're still watching, you already feel it. This isn't entertainment, it's revelation. Most will scroll away to protect their comfort. But you can keep their memory alive. Subscribe so their voices aren't buried again. And if you refuse, write in the comments why silence feels safer. Each year, when the moon turned full and the air hung heavy with dust and perfume, the city prepared for what it called the renewal of purity. Drums began days before, rolling across the river like thunder, summoning every woman of Babylon to the temple of Ishtar. From the highest noble's daughter to the poorest slave, all were bound by the same decree. Once in her lifetime, she must surrender her body to the goddess. Refusal was not defiance of the priests, it was rebellion against the gods themselves. You move with the crowd through streets thick with incense smoke. Torches turn the night into a trembling orange haze. The women are silent, veiled, their faces hidden beneath thin gauze. Silver coins glint in their hands, offerings that will not buy forgiveness but entry. In the great courtyard, the air hums with prayer and heat. The temple gates open, and the smell of oil and wine floods out. Inside, the floor is polished to a mirror sheen. Statues of the goddess line the walls, each one staring down with eyes of lapis and gold. At the center stands a dais draped in crimson. The priests chant blessings, their voices slow and resonant, carrying promises of fertility, fortune, and favor. When the first girl steps forward, the crowd murmurs in awe. A stranger approaches, a man chosen by lot, by wealth, or by whim. He places a coin on her lap, whispers the name of the goddess, and the ritual begins. They say the goddess blesses every union, that each act brings new life to the land. But as you watch, you see faces turned away, eyes wide with disbelief. The chant grows louder to drown the sound of sobbing. Each offering is consumed by the night, and by morning the temple floor gleams with spilled oil and silence. The priests call it devotion. The city calls it tradition. Yet every woman leaves something behind she can never reclaim. When dawn rises, the streets fill again with laughter and trade, as if the night's offering had never happened. Merchants sweep away the petals and ashes. The goddess, they say, is satisfied. The fields will prosper. The river will not flood. The cycle continues. But devotion demands more than flesh. It demands blood. Behind the altar, in the inner chambers where no uninitiated may enter, the priests of Ishtar prepare their own sacrifice. The same men who bless the women's offerings take knives to their own skin. With stone blades, they open their chests and thighs, letting blood fall into copper basins. They call it the proof of purity, the shedding of mortal weakness. Some drive thorns into their arms. Others slice the scalp until it runs red. They sway and chant, eyes rolled to the ceiling, proclaiming that pain draws them closer to the divine. The frenzy builds. Flutes wail, drums quicken. The priests anoint each other with blood and oil, and what begins as ceremony dissolves into chaos. Bodies twist together, trembling under the weight of fevered ecstasy. They believe the goddess moves among them, that she claims them through suffering. To the watchers behind the veils, it looks less like worship and more like possession. Then there is the moment that the city remembers and whispers, the night the gods looked away. It began as all others did. The music, the smoke, the prayers. But as the chants rose higher, something in the room shifted. The torches flared blue, the air grew still, and the idols seemed to turn from the altar. The high priest stumbled, his knife falling to the floor. Silence swallowed the temple. For the first time, the priests stopped singing. They said later it was an omen, that the goddess herself had hidden her face in shame. From that night forward, even the king felt the tremor of doubt. Yet he would not abandon the rites. The king's bloodline was tied to the goddess. Each year, at the spring equinox, he joined the high priestess in what they called the sacred marriage. The city gathered beneath the terraces to watch torches climb the ziggurat. At its summit stood the royal canopy, white as bone against the dark sky. There, the king waited clothed in linen and gold, the priestess crowned with a serpent of lapis. Before the crowd, they joined in union, symbol of heaven and earth made one. The priests below chanted of divine harmony, of balance restored. But those close enough to see the king's face knew the truth. This was not holiness, it was dominion. The ritual made him a god in the eyes of the people. Every breath he took within that canopy was another thread binding faith to his rule. Through the priestess, he touched the goddess. Through her body, he claimed the city. The crowd knelt and pressed their foreheads to the stone. They could not see the fear in the priestess's eyes, or the blood that stained the sheets when the ceremony ended. When dawn came, the king descended as both man and deity. The priests proclaimed that Babylon's favor had been renewed, that the gods had smiled again. But the scent of incense could not cover what lingered in the air, the sharp tang of sweat and iron, the echo of cries that no hymn could sanctify. The empire called it faith. History would call it something else. You feel the anger rising? Good. That's humanity waking up. Don't let it fade when the video ends. Subscribe, not for me, but for the history no one else dares to tell. And if you choose silence, say in the comments why you'd rather forget. When the festivals ended and the torches burned low, the city turned its eyes away from the women who had served the goddess. Their names were never carved into stone or pressed into clay. They left no hymns, no elegies. Their voices dissolved into the dust beneath the temple floors. The priests recorded the weight of gold and silver offered that season, the count of oxen sacrificed, the number of jars of oil consumed, but not the number of bodies broken in service to holiness. You walk now through the ruins that remain, the air dry and stinging. Clay fragments lie half buried in the earth, the edges marked with the wedge-shaped script of accountants and magistrates. Among them, a shard bears faint lines, numbers, tallies, and inventory. It lists objects lost to time, bolts of cloth, amphorae of grain, and one final word almost erased by centuries of dust. The word means offering. Nothing more. No description, no name. Just the mark of a debt paid in flesh. Excavators found the bones of young women beneath the ziggurat's base, arranged in careful rows, their hands bound with bronze wire that had turned green with age. A few still wore beads of carnelian around their necks, charms meant to protect the soul. Some skulls bore cracks, others were intact, faces turned toward the ceiling as if still waiting for release. The official reports call them ritual attendants, servants of the temple. But the silence that hangs over them feels heavier than scholarship can explain. The city's records celebrate victories and trade, wars won and monuments raised. But nowhere is there mention of the countless who vanished behind the temple gates. The scribes immortalized kings and generals, not the girls who fed the goddess her devotion. History polished the stone until only glory remained, leaving behind the stains that could not be washed away. No names, no faces, no memory. Until now, every empire that worships power learns the same language. It calls cruelty necessity. It shapes its sins into symbols and carves them in marble so that no one will notice the blood beneath the polish. Babylon perfected that art. It said the gods required obedience, that desire must be purified through pain, that domination was order. And long after the torches died and the drums went silent, those justifications found new voices. You have heard them before. In every age, in every capital, the same words rise: sacrifice for progress, obedience for peace, silence for stability. Each generation builds its temples higher, prouder, convinced its foundation is clean. Yet beneath every triumph lies the same buried heartbeat, the same echo of what was taken to make the stone shine. The tools change, the reasoning remains. When civilizations justify sin in the language of virtue, the pattern repeats. The merchants of Babylon are gone, but others still count profit over mercy. The priests no longer sing in her temples, but their logic survives in the mouths of those who trade justice for comfort. The story never ends because the lesson was never learned. The idols wear new faces now, lit by modern fire, but they demand the same offerings: the weak, the voiceless, the forgotten. The fall began long before the walls cracked. When the empire reached its height, when gold flowed through its streets and the ziggurats scraped the clouds, the signs were already there. The river that had carried life began to turn against the land. Crops failed. Plague crept through the lower districts. The priests declared it punishment for disobedience, and so the rituals grew darker, the sacrifices larger. But the gods remained silent. Then came the armies. Cyrus and his men crossed the Euphrates by night while the city feasted. Babylon's gates stood open, its guards drunk on celebration. By dawn, the streets were filled with soldiers. The king was seized in his palace, the temple treasures divided. No divine fire descended to protect them, no voice thundered from the heavens. The gods they had served turned away, or perhaps they had never listened at all. When the smoke cleared, the conquerors found what the people of Babylon could not bear to see. The hidden rooms beneath the ziggurat, the altars blackened by blood, the instruments of devotion rusted in their places. They sealed the chambers and built over them, hoping to erase the memory. But stone remembers, dust remembers. The earth itself holds the weight of every prayer whispered through pain. Empires do not die in a single night of conquest. They die slowly, long before the first wall falls, corroded from within by their own lies. Babylon fell because it believed cruelty could be holy, because it mistook submission for peace, because it confused the echo of its own power with the voice of the divine. And long after its towers collapsed, that same faith in power lingers, whispering to every civilization that calls itself chosen. The river still runs past the ruins, wide and brown and patient. It carries fragments of brick and bone to the sea, and with them the faintest trace of a lesson no one wants to learn. No city, no empire, no god can stand forever on the backs of the forgotten. Centuries passed, and Babylon sank into the sand. The wind erased her roads, the river devoured her walls, and the languages that once praised her gods turned to ash on forgotten tongues. Yet the memory of her splendor endured, purified, simplified, rewritten. The chroniclers of later empires painted her not as a monument to corruption, but as a warning against pride. They carved away her darkness and kept only the glitter, describing a city of gardens and geometry, of wisdom and invention. What was once sin became myth. What was once pain became poetry. In the scrolls of the Greeks, she was a marvel. In the writings of Rome, she was an example. In the scriptures that followed, she was cursed, condemned as the mother of all wickedness. But even then, her rituals were softened into symbols. No one dared describe the screams that fed her gods, the systems that turned devotion into debt. The priests who had overseen her fall were long dead, but their successors carried the same instinct: hide the horror, polish the stone. Each new civilization inherited her guilt and buried it deeper, telling themselves that they had built something better. When archaeologists came millennia later, they found the ruins stripped of meaning. The tablets were cracked, the carvings chipped away. The temples stood as hollow shells, their floors swept clean by centuries of denial. The scholars called the stories myths, the evidence ritual artifacts. They recorded the measurements of the chambers, but not the silence that hung inside them. They spoke of craftsmanship and culture, not of cruelty. They wanted to preserve history, not to feel it. They wanted a Babylon they could admire, not one that could haunt them. But memory is never erased, it only sleeps. Every inscription half buried in clay, every bone beneath the altar, whispers the same unfinished sentence. It waits for someone to listen without comfort, to read without translation, to accept that civilization's light has always cast a shadow just as deep. The forbidden memory of Babylon is not in her ruins. it is in us. And though her towers have fallen, the gods still watch. They no longer wear crowns of gold or robes of crimson. They stare from glass towers and glowing screens. They no longer demand sacrifice at the altar, but they take it all the same, from labor, from hunger, from silence. You see them when greed is called ambition, when cruelty is justified as necessity, when the suffering of the weak is renamed the price of progress. We have learned to build higher walls, stronger machines, brighter lights, but not wiser hearts. Babylon's blindness was believing that greatness could cleanse guilt. Ours is believing that forgetting can. Look around. Cities still rise from the bones of the voiceless. Temples still echo with the prayers of those who will never be heard. The names have changed, the rituals refined, but the rhythm is the same. Build, consume, sanctify, collapse. Every time we choose comfort over conscience, we repeat the hymn that once filled her streets. Every time we look away, we kneel again before the idols she created. Empires fall when compassion dies. Babylon forgot, will we? This is Dark Ancient Stories, where the buried speak again. Subscribe, not for pleasure, but for conscience. If you walk away untouched, comment why. Because indifference is the new Babylon. Let your click be their echo through time.